library would like to welcome you to this presentation on berry growing for the home gardener by Ben Waterman. He's the owner with his wife, Stacey Waterman of Waterman Orchards here in Johnson. And another good resource for berry growing is the library's collection on permaculture. We've highlighted some of these titles on the website, and they include some wonderful manuals that Ben recommended on growing strawberries, blueberries, and brambles. I want you to know that the presentation is being recorded and will be hosted by Green Mountain Public Access Television. And I'm going to send out the link in a week or so when it becomes available to me on how to see the presentation if you want to share it with anyone who missed it or see it again, of course. But I also want you to know that the Green Mountain Public Access Television archives these recordings after 3 or 4 years on YouTube. If you could write your questions in the chat room during the presentation, and Ben's going to stop after the different sections of his presentation and elicit questions, and you can use the hand raising mechanism so we can call on you. I'm presently at the library, so if you're having trouble accessing this, please call the library at 635-7141 and I'll try to help you. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ben Waterman.
Thanks, Dorgan. Hi, everyone. This is great. It's spring is right around the corner, and it's wonderful to see everyone thinking about gardening, berry growing. Or at least yesterday, it seemed like spring was right around the corner, but maybe not today. But yeah, sure enough, there is hope for green grass and that springtime fever. It's right around the corner. Berry growing is something that that we derive great joy from. It's really, for us, it's a year-round endeavor. It doesn't have to be. It can be small scale hobby. So that you'll see I've got a little slide presentation prepared. You'll see a lot of the slides are more commercially oriented. There's a lot of pictures of kind of rows of berries and that kind of thing. But the same principles apply to commercial berry farming and growing berries at home. So I've structured the slideshow into main topic areas that are relevant to all types of perennials production. So I instead of going through the specifics of blueberry, the specifics of strawberry and raspberry and so on, the same basic principles really apply to all of those. And then if you guys have questions that are specific to each of those types of fruits, feel free to shoot them our way. But as Dorgan mentioned, it'd be great if you guys could keep your questions maybe specific to each topic that I cover, and then I'll pause at the end of each topic area for you guys to raise hands or just shout out questions. I think we've got a small enough group. I don't know if Dorgan will maybe let us know how to field questions exactly, but and then at the end of we can just have random questions. But feel free to ask them along the way as well. If you've got a random burning question, feel free to shout it out. We'd rather you do that than us forget about it. So with that said, I'll start sharing my screen and introduce the main considerations in growing perennials at home, in your backyard, your front yard for that matter. All right, just to introduce our farm really quickly, Dorgan mentioned my wife, Stacey Waterman, and I, and our son, Mac, and daughter, Claire, we operate Waterman Orchards in Johnson. And we've ran the business for the past 10 years or so. And we do mainly spring strawberries and then blueberries in the summertime. And we've got a U-pick for blueberries. And we also sell at the Stowe Farmers Market. We're there maybe 6 weeks out of the summer. And then we've got our berries in various stores all around the area. And as I mentioned before, it's really just it's an endeavor of great joy. It's it's really kind of the essence of summer for us. So we hope to see you guys. Stop by the farm anytime. Hope to see you sometime soon. So I'll talk about first just the basic considerations for perennials plantings And to me, this is really like the prime consideration. This is kind of the take home message of this whole um, talk here. Really, if you guys don't learn anything else, this would be the most important thing to know, or kind of my most basic form of advice, or the most important advice I can give to anyone who's considering planting berries for the first time, or even the second or third or fourth time. It is site prep. Site preparation is key to successful production of berries, all the way from planting to harvest. And it's just the most common mistake I see is sort of this kind. I'll tell a story in a minute. This is my father-in-law, Bill, and this was our first blueberry planting. And so I'll tell a story in a minute about how we kind of really messed it up. It's definitely not Bill's fault, but we just got impatient, and that's kind of what I see happen with berry growers everywhere. Is they think it's something that's long term, so it's going to take a while for the bushes to bear fruit. So we better get them in the ground right away. But that kind of reasoning really sets you up for a lot of trouble. It really, again, like the most important advice I give everyone is that you really need to be patient. The preparation time should mirror the length of the perennial that you're, like the lifespan of the perennial that you're planting, as opposed to getting something in the ground as quick as you can. It's the same in every walk of life. You buy a house or something, like, you take your time to do due diligence, you shop around, because that's going to be a more permanent kind of asset. Whereas you put up a shed or some other carport or something, you go, pick out whatever's available at Tractor Supply. So the mistake I see is rushing to get the berries in the ground. This is the story here. Basically ended in us ripping the bushes back out of the ground, because we didn't do a lot of the things that I'll talk about in a couple minutes. We didn't do adequate perennial weed eradication. We did not do adequate soil fertility building before we sunk the bushes in the ground. We didn't set up adequate irrigation. We didn't have a plan for many of those things. We just were eager to throw the bushes in the ground. And then we found out 2 or 3 years later, maybe 5 years later, nothing was working. And we had to take 250 blueberry bushes back out of the ground and kind of start over. So learn from my mistake. There's a saying, I think, like something like, mistakes are so valuable, I wish I could make more of them. But yeah, you definitely don't have to make that mistake. Just prepare the site. It might seem overkill. You obviously don't have to do it with a tractor, but if you can rent a rototiller at Johnson Farm and Garden, anywhere around, and really till up the soil and make sure that there's it might seem excessive if you do it to the degree where you're getting bare ground, but in effect, you're taking care of all the perennial weeds that are really going to be a prime headache throughout the lifespan of the planting. And then you also have the chance to enhance soil fertility by adding compost, by adding manure. You have easy access to the soil to do soil tests. Soil testing is another key for site preparation, and that first phase before you've even thought about putting a bush in the ground. It's a great idea to do soil tests. UVM Extension does tests for, I think it's $14 or $15 a pop. You just take samples in the area where you're planting and put the soil. It's about a handful of soil. You put it in a Ziploc bag and send it off to UVM Soil Testing Lab. And you can download the form online, and they send you back results. They're going to tell you what your pH is if you need to alter it, and you can check on the form that you intend to plant raspberries, you intend to plant blueberries on that very site, and they'll send you back recommendations on what you need to do to bring the site to its optimum potential for that planting. Perennial weeds are our biggest enemy. I don't want to. We don't need to have kind of battleground analogies there, but weeds do serve a purpose. They hold soil. They prevent soil erosion and runoff. But this is quackgrass here. Serenoa repens, I believe is a Latin name. And it is a voracious weed. It occurs everywhere around here, the whole part of the state, whole New England region. And so chances are it's in your backyard, it's in your hayfield, it's at your site where you want to plant berries. It might be outcompeted for the time being by your grasses or by your other garden plantings. But if you're not careful, it can slowly, it's very opportunistic. It sends these rhizomes that are pictured here kind of secretly underground, and it sends them to wherever they can poke back up. So they'll even go laterally like 3 feet to find bare ground, and they'll poke right back up. So you can get rid of this stuff if you keep tilling an area. So you'd with that rototiller, you'd hit it once, and then you come back a month later and you'd hit it again. If you don't want to use mechanized equipment, you can just do that by hand. Just hoe up an area, wait for it to come back, and then come to the same place a month later and hoe the same area and do the same thing 3 or 4 times in 1 year. And then you've adequately eradicated this weed and other perennial weeds like reed canary grass that are really going to be a huge headache for the rest of your planting if you don't get rid of them before you plant. I'm so intimate with this weed. I wrote an article. I used to work for UVM Agricultural Extension, and I wrote a blog article on it. And it's still a popular article. It's great. There's a lot of great information about the weed and different methods you can use to get rid of it. So again, this is relevant to any perennial that you have. And this could be fruit trees, even if you want to plant. Get rid of this quackgrass and other perennial weeds first. So you can find this article online if you just search UVM Extension New Farmer Project, or the title Outsmarting Quackgrass. Some folks use tarping to get rid of the perennial weeds. They'll just smother an area with tarp. This is like silage plastic or something. You can use any household tarp you find at the hardware store and just cover an area. And but you've got to give yourself time. You've got to cover it for, let's say, a whole growing season. And that way, those perennial weeds they're going to try to poke through the stuff. They're going to try to poke around it, but you've basically exhausted the energy store that the perennial weed has in the root system. And then the weeds die off. And you also get beautiful, when you pull this tarp back up, you get beautiful friable soil. All the earthworms have had a chance to work through it. All the other soil microbiology has had a chance to kind of digest whatever organic matter is in the root system of whatever sod that you're smothering. So this is like a really practical method for soil preparation. And this is just to illustrate a point of how much of a headache this stuff can be. And so on the photo on your left, we had a weed fabric that was trying to smother this stuff, and the quackgrass just poked right through that and kind of smothered the weed fabric. And then it's 10 times harder to get the quackgrass out of the weed fabric. So the moral of the story there is get rid of the quackgrass before you put down any mulch or weed fabric. And then the photo on the right just illustrates what happens when you do adequately prepare a site, when you prepare a site, but you don't thoroughly prepare it. You see the weeds are coming up on the sides of the rows there. And a year later, those weeds are going to creep right into the row and smother the bush. So with that, I can pause. If you guys have any questions about site preparation, soil testing, and the like, I'll pass the mic to you, Dorgan.
So Ben, there's a question about using newspaper before you place soil down for a new berry patch.
Okay. Yeah, the newspaper is a great method, but it's probably it's not as good as cardboard or something, or the tarping, because maybe a month or 2 into it, the newspaper is going to get wet and those perennial weeds are going to poke right up through it. So maybe many layers of newspaper, and then keep an eye on it just to make sure the weeds aren't poking through it. And if that happens, just put down some more.
And Ben, two things. One is we've lost your video, and
Yep.
also there's a question about whether you need to test soil yearly.
Yeah, I turned off my camera just to save bandwidth because my internet connection might be unstable. Just but do we test soil yearly? No, I don't think that's necessary. Once at the outset of the planting, I would say is kind of next to necessary. And then if there are issues with the planting, then do some more soil tests to try to figure out what the issues are. With blueberries, there might be some nuances there where you might do a soil test at the outset before you plant, and then the pH comes back. Blueberries require a very specific pH range. They need acidic soil. So the soil test might come back, and it might not be acidic enough. And then you can take steps to acidify the soil. Then you might want to do another soil test before you plant, just to make sure you've gotten the acidity to the right level. But once that's dialed in, I would say maybe every 4 or 5 years would be standard.
Someone has saying they already planted a few blueberry bushes without adequately preparing the site. Is there still hope for those bushes if I pull them out and replant?
Yeah, there's definitely still hope for the site. We've moved a lot of blueberry bushes over the years, and it depends how big the bush is and like how hard of a job it's going to be, but they can definitely be moved, and then the site can be revamped. That's often easier than trying to modify the soil pH and the soil fertility while the bush is in the ground. Like you can see in the photo on the right here, it's really hard, it's really hard to do any mechanized tillage right next to the bush because the blueberry roots are so shallow that you'll disturb the blueberry roots if you try to mechanize and eradicate the weeds around it in the immediate vicinity. So yeah, I mean, you could consider the tarping method and sort of trying to smother the weeds, but if that doesn't work, you could definitely transplant the bushes. Perennials are not like annual perennials. Most berries, with the exception of strawberries, can be transplanted regardless of the stage of growth they're in.
Somebody is asking, can it become over-acidified?
Definitely. Yeah, hence the importance of soil testing after you've done whatever kind of modification you think is needed, just to verify that the pH is in the right range. All the berries that are the topic or that are the subject of this talk, brambles, strawberries, and blueberries, they require specific pH ranges. So even for something like strawberries, which is up at like 6.5 at 7, if you're less than 6.5, you'll want to lime to bring the pH back up to 6.5 and to 7 range. So yeah, sulfur is the amendment. It's an organic, it's basically a mineral. Elemental sulfur is the amendment that you would use to acidify soil, and then lime is what you'd use to make it more alkaline or less acidic. You can get those both at any garden store. Sulfur is a little harder to get, but you can find it. So I'll keep moving here, and then you guys, if you have any more questions, we'll have hopefully we'll have a bunch of time at the end for general Q&A. So nursery stock, this is another area where we've kind of learned the hard way that you can get good plants and you can get bad plants. You can get the plants that they sell at Home Depot, which I would say are high risk because they can bring in disease, and they're not, they're coming from other parts of the country. They might be tempting because they're cheap, but they're coming from other parts of the country where they're not climate acclimated. They might harbor disease, whereas you can source plants from reputable nurseries and that test their plants for disease before they send them out. Those might be a little bit more expensive, but I think they're well worth it to get nursery stock from a reputable supplier. General considerations in sourcing your plants: you want varieties that are cold hardy. That's really the key up in northern Vermont. We're in Johnson. I'm not sure about other parts, but I believe in Johnson we're zone 4A. So that's the USDA hardiness map zone, which most nursery stock should be labeled for. You know, the nursery suppliers might give you a range. You know, this is zone 5 to 7, but you want to be looking at the lower number there. If it's a zone 5 to 7 plant, that means in a zone 4 area like we have here where it's colder, that zone 5 to 7 plant might experience some winters where all the buds will die off. So that'd be a riskier proposition than sourcing nursery stock that's bred to be cold hardy to zone 4. So that's what you want around here. You can gamble, and I'd encourage all of you to do so as home gardeners, to gamble with that a little bit. Because what makes gardening so interesting is that you can plant a variety, and you can experiment, you can take risks, you can create microclimates. You might have a south-facing side of a shed or a house where you're gathering a lot of that sun and the soil retains more heat, in which case you could experiment with less cold hardy plants. The advantage there is that there's just so many other great berries that are not cold hardy. You know, that the flavor is fantastic, and they've got vigorous growth habit. They're just not there's just not enough cold hardy to plant here consistently, but as gardeners, you can definitely experiment. This is a picture of witch's broom. It's a common blueberry disease, and just hammer home the point that you can inquire wherever you get plants. It's worth it to inquire what kind of virus testing the nursery does, and what kind of diseases are common to the plant. We don't have time in this today to go over all the diseases, obviously, unless you guys have questions about specifics. But this is bad. This is what you don't want to see, obviously. You want to see this. You want to see really healthy nursery stock. You want to, it'd be obvious to you when you inspect the nursery stock if it's diseased or not. At least it should be obvious. There might be some really wonky diseases you can't see, but for the most part, you want really vigorous, healthy nursery stock. It makes a world of difference. It really does. Assuming you've got your site prepped, the next most important thing is to have really healthy nursery stock. I would say with perennials, it's really worth the investment in, especially if you don't have a lot of time to baby the plants when they first get in the ground. You know, you might not have the time to really like water them every day. You might not have time to weed them consistently, or like, make sure the deer, make sure the deer and the birds aren't getting you. If you're that kind of person that's really busy, you don't have much time, it's worth investing more money at the outset and getting really kind of more mature nursery stock. These pictured here, I think, are 2-year-old blueberry bushes, but I would suggest even going like 3 or 4 years, and you pay more money, but they're going to be a lot hardier once they're sunk into the ground. And this is another example of that that you can kind of take a look at the rootstock. These we've made it a practice at our farm to buy in nursery stock when we need it, and then we sink the nursery stock into the ground in like a kind of a secondary nursery where the plants might stay a year or two more. And so there we can really baby them. You know, we know that the soil in that little area, that nursery, is really rich, and we've got some drip irrigation set up there, so we can water it on timers. It's kind of automatic watering all the time. It's really important for perennial. We'll talk about that in a minute, to have adequate water. So as opposed to throwing them in the backyard far away from your house or whatever, where you might get to water them, but there might be weeks at a time when you don't. It's much better to kind of temporarily set them up. If you're getting really small nursery stock, temporarily set them up somewhere where you'll be able to water them, you'll be able to weed them, and so on. Keep an eye on them. And the result is, in 2 or 3 years after that, you get these huge root systems, like the picture on the right. And then the plant is ready to go into a more permanent location. It's the same example here for strawberries. You can do the same thing for strawberries. Most strawberry plants come bare root stock, and and strawberries are much more like on the end of the spectrum of between perennials and annuals, where um, you're not going to make much difference by quote unquote incubating strawberry plants, but that definitely can be done here. We we would get strawberry tips and then propagate them in the greenhouse so they can really develop their root systems. That's the key, is that you're enabling the plant to develop a really strong root system before you put it into a more permanent location. So I'll pause there again in case anyone has any questions.
I don't see any questions, Ben. Nobody has their hand up. Nothing in the chat. So you could probably, maybe people will think of a question later.
Sure. So next step, preparing planting holes. You really, this is your chance to, your like kind of last chance to enrich in the soil before you sink a bush into it. That would, it's going to be a lot harder to do this when there's something there for the next 10 years. So next 20, 30, 40 years. So this is your really your great chance to amend, and it's worth the investment in compost. Compost is kind of that magic stuff. It aerates the soil at the same time. It enables it to hold water, and it's got a lot of biological activity, a lot of inherent soil fertility that breaks down over the years, which is great for something very slow like berries. And you can do this also based on soil test. If you need to do your liming, that's good to do well before you plant, but you might need to do some final tweaks, and you can sprinkle that a little bit of lime into the planting holes if you need to. You can sprinkle some organic fertilizer into the planting holes, just get everything nice and mixed up. And there's obviously all different methods. You guys probably have your favorite methods here already. And feel free to suggest them in the chat, anything that's worked well for you in preparing planting holes for berries. For us, a rule of thumb has been to dig wide rather than deep. The goal is to have nice spreading root systems. A lot of the berry plants don't really go that deep. Maybe the exception of raspberries, if you let them. They're not like fruit trees that really need a deep root system. Blueberries especially have a very shallow root system. So it's much better to go wider with your planting hole than deep. You can go deep if you want to, but not much. A blueberry root system, for example, doesn't really get much deeper than a foot deep ever, unless we're talking a really, really mature planting. Strawberries is also on that end of the spectrum, obviously a really, really shallow root system. A strawberry root system might be 10 inches deep at the most. So this is related, the importance of fungi in a soil is related to preparing a planting hole. All of the blueberries, brambles, and strawberries rely on a symbiotic relationship in the soil with mycorrhizae fungi. So these are fungi that have evolved with the plants over tens of thousands of years. The fungi penetrate the roots. So the slide on the right, the picture on the right there is a microscope slide of blueberry roots, where I can't really see it that well, but if you can see the little black dots, like just sprinkled throughout the roots, those are mycorrhizae fungi that have penetrated the root cells. And then the fungi extend outwards, it's almost like a secondary root system, and mine the soil for nutrients and water, and bring those nutrients back to the root system. And a lot of these plants, a lot of these perennials really have evolved with the fungi to the point where if you don't have them present in your soil, it's a real missed opportunity. The perennials will survive, they'll definitely grow, and you might get fruit. But if you have this beneficial relationship, the fungi present in your soil, then they can really take off kind of how they were meant to do. So you can inoculate the soil, you can inoculate your planting holes, you can kind of throw them in, you can throw sprinkle the fungi in with your compost, in with the soil in your planting holes. That's one method. Another method is to, sometimes you get a dry product and you can wet the root ball and then rub the dry product on the outside the root ball so it sticks on there. And that would be kind of inoculating the root ball. And another method that we've been using a lot more lately is a liquid. I don't have any photos of it here, but you would kind of do the same thing. Like if you had a tub, like pictured here, you would fill the tub with a couple gallons of solution of water, and then there's all kinds of products you can get that dissolve into the water. It creates like a muddy looking slurry, and then you just dunk the root ball into that slurry before you plant. I really can't overemphasize the importance of doing this. The trick is sometimes finding the right type of fungi that will associate with the plant that you're planting. For brambles and strawberries, that's pretty straightforward. Most of the products that you can get at any garden store, all the mycorrhizae fungi products that you get at the gardening stores, will be adequate for strawberries and brambles. For blueberries, those products are not going to work. You need a very special mycorrhizae fungi for blueberries. There's only a couple companies in the nation that supply it. An alternative, if you want to do blueberries, is to find a wild blueberry patch somewhere, or a wild patch of plants growing in the Ericaceae family, like hollies or rhododendrons, azaleas, and just dig up the first inch or two of topsoil from that area, and then do the same thing here, like rub that onto the root ball of the blueberries before you plant, and then you'll inoculate the blueberry. The same fungi that relate with the blueberries also relate to all the plants in the Ericaceous family, like the hollies, the rhododendrons, etc. Any questions about the mulch system? Because that makes nutrients much more available to your plants than if the system is dominated by bacteria breaking down organic matter, which you get from more of a bare soil or a more disturbed soil. So the key take home here, the way that you get this really rich, like all the white that you're seeing there, that's all the fungi and mycelium that have run through this massive wood chips. And there's this whole rich network that's breaking down the wood chips. So the take home point here is you get this when you have an undisturbed mulch system. When you have, let's say, 6 inches of mulch that is effective enough at keeping weeds at bay, where you don't have to like get down on your hands and knees and pull weeds through it all the time, so it stays undisturbed, or you're not running rakes over it, you're not moving around a lot, and over a couple of years it will form this fungi. If the fungi are pretty delicate, but if you manage things that way, in a relatively undisturbed state, the fungi will really start taking over and enriching your whole system. And that's needless to say, you get this with a natural mulch, and you can't really get it with plastic or the fabric. This is another method. This is a living mulch method. There's a combination here. There's wood chips, and then there's this right on the others in the middles. There's we've experimented with living mulches, so you can plant low-growing clovers or other plants that will outcompete weeds, that will provide other benefits as well. So this you can't really hear them here. You can't really see them here, but there's bees just buzzing throughout this area at this time. And as we'll talk about in a minute, they're crucial for your berry production as well, all the pollinators. And this is a close-up of root nodules. So a part of a benefit of a living mulch system here is these are all, this is white clover, white Dutch clover. And the benefit here is not only pollinator habitat, not only weed suppression, but they're on the roots of these leguminous plants are nodules that fix nitrogen from the atmosphere and put nitrogen into the soil. So there's like those little red, or sorry, not red, pinkish, whitish nodes there are all the nodules that the clover roots have formed, and those break down in the soil and provide your plants with fertility. So I'll just keep rolling, Dory.
Yep.
You just stop me if there's questions, but you're just kind of segueing into the pollinator topic here. The pollinators are crucial for berry plantings. You guys already probably know that. What I can offer is maybe some strategies to enhancing pollinator activity and habitat. So are some concepts that we borrowed from ecologists over the years. I think, namely, habitat diversity. That's really the strategy that we've latched onto. Pollinators are they're so diverse, especially for strawberries, raspberries, blackberries, and blueberries. There's so many different types of pollinators that work. Honeybees, on the other hand, are not really as effective. Their honeybees are much more effective for raspberries and blackberries, but for strawberries and blueberries, not so much. So we really rely on natural pollinators. And going back to the habitat strategy, these pollinators rely on habitat, obviously. Anytime we carve away, we kind of carve away a field or like plant a turf grass lawn or any other commercial disturbance, we take away pollinator habitat. So the best management system for pollinators is obviously planting lots of flowers at that flower at different times of the year. So all the various types of pollinators can have a food source year round that's close to your perennial planting. And then also, if you've got a bigger property, to have mixes of different patches of areas that you leave wild that are not brush hogged. So you can do that intentionally. Let's say you've got a back field or something that you're brush hogging. You can brush hog pathways or kind of leave patches in that area that's not brush hogged or mowed to kind of grow up into natural flowering meadow plants to serve as pollinator habitat. You can plant pollen. If you're doing a larger area, you can buy seed mixes that you can spread. They've got all kinds of flowers that make your area beautiful. That's another easy method to do. If you clear an area, let's say 10 square feet even, you can buy a special pollinator seed mix that you just spread out on that area, and then you'll have flowers popping up within a year or two, and providing habitat for all these important bees, butterflies, moths, all kinds of stuff. This is a funny meeting I had with this bumblebee here. Some UVM researchers were doing a project where they were measuring nectar quality of the blueberry flowers. So they needed to make sure that the bumblebees in the area were not disturbing the flowers before they could take samples of the nectar. And so I had this meeting out in the field, and this is like late May when the blueberries flower, and this bumblebee was so pissed off. He was like just like so buzzing so loudly and just going crazy and just yelling at me, let me in, god damn it, let me in. It's like I just for the sake of research I couldn't, but there was plenty of other flowers right next door for him. The shot on the right there is our boxes that anyone can make. These serve the type of pollinators that nest in they kind of burrow into tubular shaped holes in trees, and then they lay their eggs in those those holes, and then they patch them with clay or soil, and then the eggs hatch the next season. So you can actually create these kinds of nest boxes for native pollinators and hang them near your gardens. It won't work for bumblebees, which is the main pollinator for blueberries and I believe raspberries, but they'll work for many other types of pollinators. Nice project to involve your kids in, or regardless of how old you are. These are kind of easy to make. You drill a bunch of holes into any scrap wood. You can buy the tube. You can see the white tubes. Those are like specific to the size that pollinators like. You can buy those if you want from some online suppliers. But if not, you just drill a bunch of holes and it'll work.
Ben, there's a question
yeah,
about how important is it to pull flowers on the first year of putting nursery plants in the ground?
It depends what your goals are. if you're really you want a little bit of fruit early, then don't pull flowers. But if you don't mind waiting, research has shown that if you pull flowers the early years, the bush will devote its energy towards vegetative production, in which case the following years you'll have bigger fruiting buds or better flowers before that fruiting. So it's a good strategy if you really, you've got some time and you want to make sure that, like, once the fruit comes, it's going to come on strong. That makes sense. On the other hand, it's on the home scale, it's definitely not necessary. And if we talk about pollinators, it's not, it's not really slowly developing the kind of habitat and ecology that pollinators like. They need to, in some cases, develop their populations over years. So in blueberries, for example, if you're pulling flowers the first 5 years of the planting, what are your bumblebees in the area going to eat during that time? So you couldn't expect them to all of a sudden at year 5 show up in droves if you've taken their food source for the first 5 years and they haven't nested in that area. So it's kind of a balance there.
Another question on the use of chicken manure for fertilization.
Chicken manure is excellent fertilizer. I was gonna mention here, we probably don't have time to get into fertilization. Unfortunately, it's a very big topic. We could spend a whole other hour on it, even the basics of it. But that's a good question, and chicken manure is especially beneficial because it does not have a lot of nitrates. There's a couple of different types of nitrogen. There's nitrate nitrogen and there's ammonia or ammonium nitrogen. And certain perennials prefer the ammonium nitrogen, which is present in chicken litter. And especially blueberries do not tolerate nitrate nitrogen, which is present in other types of nitrogen fertilizers. Especially synthetic fertilizers usually contain a lot of nitrate nitrogen, which is like the steroid kind of nitrogen. If you think of it that way, it's like the quick burst of nutrients, whereas the ammonium nitrogen that's present in the chicken litter is much more slow release, and it's the more rudimentary and basic form of nitrogen that's it's slower to become available, but it's also it's what blueberries especially prefer.
There's another question about Diane has 3 bushes that produce very small blueberries. 3 of her bushes within a larger blueberry patch, and the 3 bushes are very small berries. Do you have any suggestions?
Yes, we'll just jump ahead here, Diane. Pruning, that's the #1 suggestion. A lot of the berry size is variety specific, and you're gonna be limited by the whatever variety you have, especially older varieties of berries, whether it be blueberry, strawberry, or brambles. A lot of the older varieties are gonna be smaller fruits, no matter what. But with that said, there is a range of fruit size even within the same variety, and you can affect a bigger fruit size by pruning, by taking pruning pretty seriously. It's just kind of common sense. What pruning does is you concentrate the energy of the bush into the root system by having less during winter, like right when you're doing the pruning, and because the following spring after you're pruning, there are less avenues to distribute that energy that comes back out of the root system and into the branches. So in effect, you're going to get more energy in each branch if you have less branches, if you've done your pruning. And on the branches that stay, you're going to have bigger fruit. So I actually brought, I don't know if this will work, but assuming you guys want to stay on for a couple more minutes, we're about near the end of this, but assuming you guys want to stay on, I brought my pruning shears here and a little branch, and I was going to do a little pruning demo. So I'll hop off here and see if this works. I don't try to wing it here. You guys see this? Just like raise your hand and clap your hand or whatever. This, we'll say this is a blueberry bush right here. And there's a couple of fundamental goals in pruning. Like we just discussed, like one of the main goals, you want to distribute the bush's energy into less branches, so you get more growth on each branch that stays after pruning. So you can see here, you've got this inferior branch here, and then you've got these nice strong canes here. I don't know how well you can see, but there's fruiting. Probably not gonna. I don't know if you guys can see that there's fruiting buds on the tips here. So one guideline in pruning is you clip the inferior branches. So I'll do that. All right, there's an inferior branch here. They say, the old timers say, every cut is a good cut. I'll just add on to that whenever you're cutting inferior branches that are smaller, more twiggy, they might be dead looking, like this guy right here. Well, I think that one just flew behind my desk. I'll probably never recover that one, but you guys at home, if you do this, you can actually keep the prunings on your mulch, because then they'll decompose and be part of your system. But yeah, that's the basics. You want to cut the dead stuff, the small stuff, and the inferior stuff, so you have fewer branches at the end. So I've got like 3 or 4 big branches right here, there, and we're going to have some big fruit. So hopefully, Diane, that answers your question.
And is it too late to prune now?
No, now's the perfect time to prune. Yeah, perfect time to prune. When you see, you can prune from now until any bear. Namely, you're not going to prune strawberries. Strawberries don't get pruned, but for raspberries, blackberries, and blueberries, you can prune from now until, let's say, mid-April. And really, the gauge there is if you see the buds starting to really swell. Once the buds on any perennials are really starting to swell, then you know that all that stored energy in the root system is shooting back up into the canes. And then you, by cutting those canes, you're kind of losing that stored energy. Whereas if you cut the canes before the buds start to swell, all of that energy is still stored in the root system. It's like the root system is like a battery. So between now and April 15th, let's say, you're not going to discharge the battery by making any pruning cuts. Whereas once the bud starts to swell, you're already starting to discharge that, but all the energy is going everywhere. And in that case, you want to wait until next winter.
Jackie had her hand up. If you want to ask your question, Jackie. Jackie, can you hear? You're still muted.
I did ask folks to raise their hand a couple of minutes ago, just if they saw the pruning. Maybe that's what Jackie was doing. I don't know. Yeah, okay.
Oh, maybe that's it. Yep, sorry. Yeah. Okay.
All right. So I didn't have many other slides left. I mean, we could adjourn now for a general Q&A. I mean, that was basically it. I was going to talk about harvest a little bit, but that's just common sense. It's pick them when you think that they're ripe. I think we as humans, we have an innate ability. It's just programmed into our DNA. We've been berry picking since our earliest evolution, and it's kind of common sense when to pick a berry. I can add there that the picking window for blueberries and raspberries is the range there's a lot wider. Whereas strawberries is something you want to make time for, to kind of get on it every day almost, especially if it's in your backyard and there's critter pressure. It's just, you can grow the most beautiful strawberries, but if you plan the harvest time for when you're on vacation or something, don't expect them to be there a week later, or don't expect them even to be there tomorrow. You just, all it takes is one slug, one bird, for strawberries to just, you're so. But berries are great to freeze. That's another part of harvest that you can. I think a common misconception is that you need to individually freeze them. But we found that as long as they're dry, you can just throw them in a bag, throw the bag in the freezer, and it's done. Strawberries, you probably want to take the leaves off. You guys probably have a lot more wisdom there than I do. Whether or not you need to remove the leaves off your strawberries before you freeze them. We do, just because it makes eating easier down the road. But so with that, I'll end and field any other questions you guys have about anything related to berry growing.
Well, there's a couple questions about, speaking of berries that disappears. Trudy wants to know about birds. I assume that's birds eating your berries. And then Jessica has a problem with mice in her strawberry patch.
If you're gardening, if you're planting berries in your backyard, wherever, and you just have a few of them, I would invest in some bird netting, and plan for that, because it's amazing how many berries a bird can eat. And just, you think that you can keep an eye on things, and then they're so, they know when you're not looking, and they just swoop right in. So it's something actually we're considering investing in, even on a large scale at our farm this year. We're thinking about investing in blueberry netting on all of our early varieties. It's really those early varieties that get hammered by the birds the most. And with the mice, it doesn't matter what time you're talking about, but the earlier variety, like the varieties of blueberries and strawberries, especially, there's a lot less food for birds at that time of year. So there's going to be a lot more pressure on the early varieties. And netting is the best thing to do. It takes a little bit more time and money to set up a net over your bushes. Sometimes you can just drape the net right onto the bushes. That's less effective, because the birds can kind of land on the net and still peck through. There's other devices that we use. You can get the bird scare devices. Just show you couple other things here. Yeah, these are scare eye balloons that you can get at most gardening stores, and you hang them up. If you really want to make an investment, the device on your left is a bird guard, and it broadcasts bird distress calls and predatory bird calls. So you'll have like a robin bird distress call, and then a hawk call followed by that. These are a lot of fun, actually. You get to know the bird calls when these are going off, and they're very effective. The scare eye balloons and the ribbon tape and the statues of owls and coyotes are really fun as well. They're just less effective. You need to keep moving them around. That's the key with bird control. Keep the birds confused. Play Jimi Hendrix music one day, and then come out and like have your kids dance around another day, and then hang the scare eye balloons another day, and then with the scare eye balloons, keep moving the locations of that, and you'll keep the birds really confused. That's the key. Yeah, we've gotten to know the birds so well, we even decided to integrate this little joke in our logo. We definitely get hammered by them no matter what we do. The mice, I'm afraid I don't have a lot more advice on the mice, other than keep areas clean, meaning like keep all grass mowed within the immediate vicinity of your planting. Keep everything nice and manicured if you've got a mouse or vole pressure, so there's no habitat that's nearby for them to take shelter in. And then you can trap and if the pressure is really bad.
Someone else had a question about chipmunks and squirrels also.
Yeah, I don't know what to. I mean, this past year was insane with chipmunks, and I don't know. I don't know if anyone survived their siege, but they yeah, someone else might have some better advice than I don't know what to do in particular with those.
Someone is suggesting letting their dog loose to chase the birds and squirrels.
Yes.
So there's a couple of other questions. One, someone's interested in information on blackberries.
Dorgan, I wanted to ask, we had a problem with the plants being just stripped, and we weren't sure if it was a deer that had done it, but it happened, and then they started to come back, and then again, they were stripped, all the leaves off of our blackberries, and we had just weeded them and mulched them, and we're so excited for them, and that happened.
So Kim, it was the leaves that were stripped, not the fruit.
Correct, leaves.
Were they stripped totally, or were there like, was there holes left? Was it insect pressure, or was it?
No, it was thorough. They had
Yeah.
leaves, and then we went out and they were sticks. There was nothing left. We thought it was deer,
Wow.
but we don't think that deer would like blackberries.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it sounds like deer.
Yeah. Okay.
But you know, another thing to consider with defoliage like that is that Japanese beetles, they can really do some serious damage. There's another pest with this probably not. It doesn't sound like this happened to you, Kim. I'll just mention it for sake of everyone. There's a stem borer that's very common to brambles, and you can see it's like high up on the cane, relatively high up on the cane. There's like it looks like something has girdled the cane, and you'll see one spot where it's girdled, and then about an inch higher than that, there'll be another girdle mark, and then the tips all start wilting and dying off. So that's extremely common, and the thing to do there is to rip off the area that's girdled, because the tip borer lays its eggs in that area. So if you rip that off and then put that in a pile and burn it, or put that in a pile and compost or something, you dramatically decrease the tip borer pressure. And remember, the tips on all these brambles is where the good fruit is. So you can really improve your yields if you do that.
So there's 4 or 5 more questions. I don't know, Ben, if you're okay with staying later to answer them.
I would be glad to, although I understand if folks want to get off. It's no, I won't be offended.
Okay. So one person would like to know the best places to plant raspberry and blueberry plants.
The best places to plant are those places, just going back to that main takeaway we discussed at the very beginning. The best places to plant are the places that you've prepared to plant. That's really, it goes such a long way to prepare a spot. There's some nuances there. It's really tough to prepare a site that's got clay soils that's really high pH. It's going to take a relatively higher investment of time and money to get those soils down to acidic pH, compared to a loamy or sandy soil that's going to be easier to manipulate. But all things being equal, the best place to plant is somewhere where you've taken, let's say, at least a year in advance to prepare the site, eradicate perennial weed pressure, take soil tests, enhance soil fertility, prepare your planting hole, source your good nursery stock, and so on. There's other general considerations. There's south-facing, adequate sunlight. All of the perennials that are the subject of this talk prefer to be in full sun. A common misconception is that you can grow them, like blueberries, especially, in partial shade. It's because they definitely can grow, and the leaves will still be green, and they'll look healthy. But if you want the optimum yields, it needs to be a spot with full sun. And then good air drainage is also really key. So a gently sloping site as opposed to a low-lying site that's kind of in a bowl that will gather frost. Need to have, and even a slope site where there's a really thick hedge or tree line on the bottom of that slope will trap frost. So pick a site where air can move downslope and all of the really cold frosty air can move away from your planting.
Diane is asking about blueberries that are soft. She says she picks them at the right time, but a day or so later, they're soft. Is this a bug?
If it's a late variety, it's most likely a bug. There's a pest that has made its way over from China called the spotted wing Drosophila. And it is notorious for causing that issue. I mean, a number of things could be happening there, but if that problem is recurring year after year and it's happening late in the season. So for blueberries, late in the season would be like mid-August and onward. It's likely the spotted wing. It's a fruit fly that kind of penetrates the blueberry. It will try to lay its eggs in the blueberry, but for the first, all it takes is one little poke in the blueberry skin, and then a couple of days later, that blueberry loses its firmness. So the best thing to do for that is to stay on the picking regularly. Pruning is also really important. If you prune out all the low-lying, all the like crowded branches and all the low-lying branches, this particular pest really likes a cool, humid environment, which is the microclimate that you create in a perennial bush if you don't prune. If you've got if sunlight cannot reach the bottom of the canopy or air can't circulate through the bush, then the spotted wing Drosophila really take residence in the brush beneath that bush, and then when the conditions are right, they'll go right up into the bush canopy and start penetrating all your berries. So good pruning, stay on the picking, and then there's some other organic sprays you can use if you to control as well.
Someone is asking, last summer the berries were so heavy the branches bent down to the ground. Should I tie the branches up?
Sounds like a good problem to have. Yes, you can definitely tie the branches up. Generally speaking, the lower the berry is to the ground, the more pressure it's going to have from the bugs, from the critters, and maybe from dirt splashing up or lawnmower clippings blowing over or whatever. So yeah, it can't hurt, but it's also not necessary. I mean, I would just embrace that time, get a good laugh, like take a picture with it, and then pick those berries.
Those are all the questions I've seen. And did I miss anybody? And in closing, I'd like to read Kyle's comment because I think it speaks for probably many of us. She says, it sounds like it's much easier to go to Waterman's orchard to pick your own. But in all seriousness, after hearing this presentation, I have a much bigger appreciation for all that goes into what you do to produce incredible berries. Thank you. And I feel the same way. I thank you very much. This has been wonderful. And you have saved us from some horrible mistakes. So I appreciate that. And the thank yous are rolling in. There was one person that her iPhone was dying and wondered if she could email you. Would that be okay with question?
Sure. Yeah. watermanorchards@gmail.com. You can find that email if you forget it on our website. That's watermanorchards.com. I think my phone number is up there as well. Yeah. Feel free to give me a call or email anytime. Yeah. And thanks for the kind words, Kyle, and for all of you who have stuck with me for over an hour and a half now.
It's been wonderful.
Yeah.
Just in closing, I just want to let everybody know that our April presentation is going to be a presentation on the flora and fauna of the Green River Reservoir by Ron Kelly. So stay tuned for that. And we're planning a bird walk with Jackie Stanton in May. So with that, I'll close it and thank you again.
Thank you.